I'm so excited about this program. We've been working on it for 6 months, and I have to say that our new relationships with the Art Directors Guild, our new relationships with Karen Maness, our new relationships with Mark Morris, our new relationships with, this was an amazing project to put this together. So I'm really grateful that everybody's here tonight to share it with us. How this program came about. On one of our open Sundays, back in January or maybe February, my new best friend, Mark Morris, a longtime member of Culver City Historical Society, and also the cinematographer for what you're going to see tonight, the video of the Backdrop Recovery Program. He came by and we started chatting about Hollywood and our careers in the motion picture business, and he started to tell me about the Art Directors Guild and what they were doing to preserve the drops that were, from MGM. He also gave me information about the recovery program, and he said that I should reach out to Thomas Walsh, the past president of the Art Directors Guild, who also is the caretaker for all of the drops. Well, to make a long story short, I contacted Thomas, bought this amazing book, The Art of the Hollywood Backdrop, which tonight you'll be meeting one of the authors, Karen Maness, and began having conversations with Karen. But then I started thinking, okay, Thomas said we can have a few of these backdrops on display. Didn't know we were going to be able to receive them, and how we were going to hang them. That was the next question. It's like, okay, now what do I do? How do we hang these things? We got these backdrops that we can go pick up, but what do we do with it? So my friend who lives on Keystone, because as I say, it takes a village to make something happen. My friend who lives on Keystone, who's also a key grip, Rodney Vito, he made a list for me, and we put that list together, and now I'm like, okay, we have the list, we have the backdrops, who do we call? And Thomas had reached out to Sony, to his contacts over at Sony, and they, without any hesitation, said, certainly, you can come get the high rollers and the sandbags and everything you need to hang these backdrops. So I'm so grateful for for what everybody has done to try to make this program happen. It was kind of interesting, me and Mark driving down the 5 past Magic Mountain to the 405 with this 20-foot-long backdrop on the top of my Jeep and backdrops hanging out the back. It was kind of fun. But and then we went to Sony. I had me and 2 guys in my car. We go to Sony and we got all the C-stands, all the sandbags, all the pipe, and all in my Jeep again. I'm like, I will never sell this car. I'm telling you, it's the best car in the world. So, but having said that, I am so grateful to Thomas Walsh, Mark Morris, Karen Maness, Rodney Vito, our friends from Sony, Beth Sadler, Kristen Kavanaugh, Mason McConnell, Kara McFadden, Roberto Brava, and Dan Nowick, and my team of volunteers here at the Culver City Historical Society for making this program come to life for all of you to enjoy. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to Ryan. I hope you enjoyed tonight's evening, and thank you for letting me be your servant, your president. Thank you.
I'm Ryan Vincent, VP of Programs. I'm going to quickly run through the backdrops, the movies actually that they came from, and I'm going to intro the book as well that we'll be learning about tonight. The Art of the Hollywood Backdrop includes sumptuous photos of movie backdrops and the stories of the scenic artists that produced them. As film historian Leonard Maltin wrote, the book, quote, reveals a facet of movie making that even savvy film buffs may not know about. You will be amazed, as I was, at the number of familiar scenes from films as varied as The Wizard of Oz, North by Northwest, and Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events that make use of these canvases. This is truly an eye-opening book and a valuable contribution to our understanding of how movies are created. The Art of the Hollywood Backdrop received the U.S. ITT Oscar G. Brackett Golden Pen Award 2018 and the University of Texas at Austin Cohen Hamilton Faculty Literary Award winner up from 2017. So the backdrops from here going around. We've got from The Washington Story from 1952. It's an American drama film directed by Robert Perosh and starring Van Johnson and Patricia Neal. The screenplay concerns a reporter in search of government corruption who falls for a congressman. In back, and I have to say, this was probably my second favorite of the choices we were given. This is from Viva Las Vegas. And the tower, we have a little bit of a Culver City connection here, is the landmark hotel and casino that Howard Hughes eventually opened. The landmark was a hotel and casino located in Paradise, Nevada, east of the Las Vegas Strip and across from the Las Vegas Convention Center. The resort included a 31-floor tower inspired by the design of the Space Needle Tower in Seattle. Frank Carroll, the project's original owner, purchased the property in 1961. Fremont Construction began work on the tower that September, but because of a lack of financing, construction was stopped in '62, with the resort approximately 80% complete. Up until 1969, the topped-off tower was the tallest building in Nevada until the completion of the International Hotel across the street. Billionaire Howard Hughes, through Hughes Tool Company, purchased the landmark in 1969 at a cost of $17.3 million. Hughes spent approximately $3 million to add his own touches to the resort before opening it on July 1st, 1969, with 400 slot machines and 503 hotel rooms. In addition to a 14,000 square foot ground floor casino, the resort also had a second, smaller casino on the 29th floor. It was the first high-rise casino in Nevada. Aside from the second casino, the 5-story Cupola Dome at top of the tower also featured restaurants, lounges, and a nightclub. Now over here. I really, really love this piece. I don't know anything about tapestry, but it seems like a pretty good facsimile that I'm betting was in the background of a shot and hardly focused upon. It's from Marie Antoinette, a 1938 American historical drama produced by MGM, directed by W.S. Van Dyke, starring Norma Shearer as Marie Antoinette. Had its premiere at the legendary Carthay Circle Theater, where the landscaping was specially decorated for the event. The film was the last project of Irving Thalberg, if you've ever gone to the MGM or Sony lot, you know that name, who died in 1936 while it was in the planning stage. His widow, Norma Shearer, remained committed to the project even while her enthusiasm for her film career in general was waning following his death. With a budget close to $2 million, it was one of the more expensive films of the 30s, but also one of the bigger successes. Now, we've got a little controversy with this one. Now, the paperwork says it's from The Gazebo, a 1959 black comedy CinemaScope film. I don't know why, I mean, CinemaScope with, I don't know. About a married couple who are being blackmailed. It was based on the play The Same Name, nominated for Academy Award for Best Costume Design, black and white. Again, black and white, and there was so much detail put into the shading and the color. According to the financial records, the film earned $1.8 million in North America, $1.4 elsewhere, making a profit of $628,000. It was also the last film released by MGM in the 50s. Now, if we look at the paperwork, which is up on there, it says, Academy note, number appears to be listed incorrectly. Could possibly be P1758, The Gazebo, or 7058. So I'm going to introduce our folks that you'll be hearing from tonight. First up, the man responsible for the video we're going to watch, Mark Morris, is an award-winning producer of commercials and videos, as well as a cinematographer and writer on numerous feature films and TV shows. He grew up in Cheviot Hills, earned his MA in Communication Arts / Film and TV at Loyola Marymount University, and operated a film production office in the Culver Hotel. There, he wrote and produced his first feature film in the streets of Culver City, which included stunts and gunfights and a visit from police to find out what was going on. He is a member of the Culver City Historical Society and currently shoots video for the Sony Pictures Stock Footage Library. Author Karen L. Maness collaborated in the 2017 Art Directors Guild Archives Backdrop Recovery Project, which recovered over 200 MGM backdrops from Hollywood's golden age of film for display and study. She is a professor of scenic art, figurative painting, and practical special effects for the UT Live Design at the University of Texas at Austin Department of Theater and Dance, and scenic art supervisor at Texas Performing Arts. Her studio practice and design work include public art, exhibitions, consultation, and corporate commissions. Her paintings have been exhibited nationally and are held in private collections worldwide. Karen Maness.
Thank you all for being here tonight. Also, Mark, thank you. Without Mark, you're going to get a chance to see his film and this project.
Cog in the machine.
It's a beautiful, perfectly timed cog in this machine, and I'm the other cog in this machine. Really happy to be here. And also, I wanted to take a moment to recognize, we have actually Bridget Duffy. She's here. She's one of the scenic artists in the Art of the Hollywood backdrop book. Yay. And a surprise, wonderful visit by my publisher, Judith Regan. There she is. So, thank you for believing in this project and making such a gorgeous book. This is exactly what these artists deserved. Because the most important part of this book, in my mind, is that the below-the-line scenic artists are finally seen and recognized for their work. They were never given screen credit, and it's such a delight to bring attention to them and their extraordinary skills.
Karen will have most everything to educate you about. I will answer questions afterwards at the end, but it was my privilege to document Karen and 8 or 10 other art directors in their efforts at saving the backdrops, pulling them out of dark storage, dusting them off, seeing what the code numbers were, matching them up with production numbers, and trying to identify them. And they were really good at it. And it was dramatic. It was dramatic to see them in the work that they were doing. So, Karen, it's all yours.
Thank you. I'm excited to offer you a glimpse into the MGM's golden age and the artists of the MGM Scenic Arts Studio.
Assembled more creative musical artists at the studio than anywhere else at any other time. You could dive into that pool of talent and never hit bottom.
Clips were a string of clips featuring the backdrops from this recovery project. This story would not even be complete or begin to start without George Gibson. He was the head of the Scenic Arts Studio at MGM.
capacity for picture, for pictorial effect. We were dealing in fantasy, you know, the yellow brick road and the hills and the odd sort of imaginative type of landscape that we had to paint. We had to develop different ways of doing things. The primary thing, of course, was the backing. What did you have on the backing? And it was fortunate that the first big challenge came in an area that was fantasy rather than reality, you know, the flying monkeys and all that kind of stuff. We had to devise methods and techniques and new systems and new schemes, you know. If it was a question of something costing $1,000 to do in an ordinary way, but $1,500 would make it the perfect way, they'd spend the $1,500, no question about it. It was a get-together. I'd be something, and I'd be somebody, and try to make the best thing, and try to do the best. There was always that spirit there, you know. It was fun to make pictures, you know. It was just day after day of nothing but interest and challenge and everything else, you know. It was a really great time.
Of MGM was George Gibson. And he was the guiding force behind the look, execution, and excellence of the backdrop painting during MGM's golden age. He was a natural painter. He had studied, initially studying engineering at Glasgow Technical College, lost his interest really quickly in that, was dissatisfied, and went to apprentice to William Glover, painting scenery in the day while studying at Edinburgh College of Art and Glasgow School of Art in the evenings. He became a scenic artist in Leeds, Carlisle, and London, where he eventually painted for the Harker Brothers Scenic Studio before immigrating to the United States. So he was a very practical Scotsman with an exceptional eye for painting, and he was incredibly demanding. If you were to work for George Gibson, if you wanted to keep your job, you needed to paint from life. And actually, Cedric Gibbons was having a difficult time keeping him on the MGM lots because he was much more interested in painting in the field. Like, I have to go painting, I have to go painting. And so they ultimately signed him in for 6 5-year contracts in a row, starting in 1938 through 1968, to keep him at the studios and keep him committed to this work. Hand-painted scenery and backdrops or backing created for movies in Hollywood were rarely recognized for what they were, nor was that their purpose. These special effect backings were among the largest paintings ever created and were breathtaking in their artistic and technical virtuosity, as you're getting a chance to see for yourselves here. Scenic artists working on backings for film and television had to master an extensive set of skills specific to these media. In addition to complete command of drawing, color theory, perspective, and the understanding of how light and shadow function in architecture and nature, the backing artist also needed to understand how to render both of these specifically for the eye of the camera. and MGM at this time, they were considered the best. The lead scenic artists of the time were George Gibson, Clark Provins, whose work you will also see at the LA County Museum of Natural History, the elephant exhibit. So he painted there. I've read some very funny stories about Clark painting in the museum, and apparently it was very hot and he was not shy, so he'd wear his underpants. So also lead artists at MGM at the time were Wayne Hill, Bob Oberbeck. Leo Atkinson is the man you could think of as the sky man of MGM from those glorious skies. Jim Dobson, John Coakley, Bill Jekyll, Duncan Spencer, if you've been around Disneyland. The big panorama of the Grand Canyon was painted by Duncan Spencer. We'll meet him a little bit more. Gordon Butcher, Ben Carre. Apprentices at MGM. Here's a young apprentice mixing up the size, the paint size and glue for preparing the backdrops to receive paint. These apprentices would work up to 6 years before being allowed to paint on the scenic backdrops, and they would pretty much be essentially like slaves to their master painters in hopes to grab some knowledge as it would come off, where they could catch from their master painters as apprentices. Here's George Gibson. He was very much by the books, completely organized. He became a Marine in the war, and he hired Marines in his shop. He wanted things very rigorous, very, very diligent about his books, his paperwork, and we have so much to thank him for in this organization for this backdrop recovery project. Here is his scenic studio. This is 1937. The scenic artist is mixing paints for Julia Misbehaves. Here we are again. And the machine that was MGM to be able to handle the quantity of backdrops that were being produced. Here we have the stitching soft goods department building the backdrops. At one point, there were so many paintings being created in the MGM Historic Scenic Art Studios that the windows were blacked out. So they could have 3 rotations of scenic artists working on those 4 100-foot frames continuously. And so they had to keep the lights stable. There was so much work happening. Here's George Gibson doing his own field painting, living by what he demanded from his scenic artists at the San Pedro Harbor. He would have his scenic artists and his team go out and paint, and then they'd have to bring their paintings back to line up their paintings in front of like the lead scenic artists and kind of get, I imagine it was not always the friendliest critiques, but it may have been great. Here is one of George Gibson's paintings. And here we have young John Coakley, who is a pivotal figure in the history of MGM, but also in the history of scenic art in the Hollywood motion picture. He's part of the dynastic family of John. His name is John Coakley. He is John Coakley of JC Backings. And we have his family to thank for what we're seeing around here today. But when he was 16 years old, his father, also a scenic artist at MGM, fell to his death off of a scaffolding. And the family went to the studio for compensation, some sort of assistance, and they said no, but maybe we'll hire one of his children. So he was 17, the eldest one was already in college, the youngest one was too young, so John Coakley was chosen, and he was one of the youngest scenic artist apprentices working under George Gibson, and he flourished. Just an extraordinary painter with a huge history you're about to hear much more of. Also, alongside him, there was another young apprentice, this is Bill Jekyll, who would go on to partner with John Coakley in the future in terms of acquiring backdrops. We'll get to that. But he was also one of George Gibson's scenic artists. So he went on to form Filmfare. And I don't know if you've been to the Scottish Rite Temple. That's now, this is the Marciano Museum. They have a collection of Masonic backdrops that were painted by Bill Jekyll's team at Film Fair. And so these Hollywood motion picture scenic artists created all of those backdrops that are part of that collection that stayed with the museum. So if you get a chance to go there, you'll be able to see the work of Duncan Spencer and Bob Oberbeck. Here we are back at MGM. This is one of the two other most important scenic artists here at MGM. Up close, this is Clark Provins, who was the one who was responsible for those African elephants, or the African elephant exhibition in the Natural History Museum. At center is John Coakley, older. The far distance is Bob Oberbeck, the other scenic artist responsible for the work over at the Scottish Rite Temple. Also among their ranks was Art Ryder. Art Glover Ryder was the colorist for MGM. He would have set all the colors and for their backdrops. So here he is working at Grosh Studios. He was also a contemporary of Sorolla, the painter Sorolla. So he's a really well-known fine artist as well and collected. So this is one of Art Ryder's pieces. He'd been painting in the 20s with Sorolla. This painting was part of the backdrop recovery project, and at the time it was photographed and unrolled and brought out on the Sony stages. We didn't know what it was, but it has been identified as being from National Velvet. And it's now in the University of Texas at Austin Scenic Studio, and I am delighted that but Art Ryder would have been the one to set this color, and the colors were gorgeous. Next up, we have Duncan Spencer. He was a lead artist. He typifies in a number of ways the best of many scenic artists of his generation. He was a consummate artist. He worked for most of the major studios and highly regarded landscape painter, also independent of his film life. And as I mentioned before, he was responsible, one of the main scenic artists for the Disneyland ride attraction that had been painted at Grosh. And there he is working on that painting for Disneyland at the R.L. Grosh with Delmer Yoakum. All right. And here is his union card, or his motion picture card, not his union card, from when he was working at MGM. All right. And here we also have Art Ryder again later. This is 1962 at MGM on Marilyn Monroe's last film, Something's Gotta Give. And he's there with Al Laundreville and Gordon Butcher. And here's Gordon Butcher again, another one of the lead scenic artists from the MGM era, who ultimately went over to 20th Century Fox with John Coakley. So a part of the expertise that these scenic artists needed to have was perspective drawing and a distinct skill in creating the sense of atmosphere and depth in a cityscape in this case. And so Ben Carre, here's Ben Carre, he was the MGM perspective master. And in 1965, at his retirement from MGM, when he was 82 years old, he was rediscovered as one of the pioneers of the motion picture industry. He had been an art director and a production designer for almost 40 films, including classics such as the 1925 version of The Phantom of the Opera, Poor Little Rich Girl, Riders of the Purple Sage, and The Jazz Singer. And he was a principal collaborator with Maurice Tournier, one of the most important directors of the silent era. But he fell into obscurity at MGM. So he had the first half of his life and his career as an art director, and he was invited, essentially, to paint in the Scenic Studios. And as soon as he crossed into the Scenic Studios, when he was no longer getting work as an art director, he fell out of history. He fell out of visibility, and he fell into obscurity. But he returned to his roots. He began his career as a scenic artist when he was 12 years old in Paris at the Atelier Amable. And he quit school at that time after his father's passing to apprentice. And years later, he went to work. At 18, he went to Gaumont Studios, and he broke his mother's heart when he left the theater for film. She said, theater is a fad. Sorry, film is a fad. It'll never go on. You're wasting your life. You need to stick with theater. But he clearly moved on to a beautiful career, an important career. So it was really meaningful to me when actually this is the way I met Mark Morris. He was longtime friends with Ben Cray, and when he saw this book had come out, he was so excited to see Ben having this recognition for his career as a scenic artist. And he's like, but you know, he had this other huge career as an art director. I'm like, I know. And this book is specifically looking at his time as a scenic artist. But because of him, we have drawings like this. Stunning. So he would have drafted all of that out in perspective. So here we have 20th Century Fox in 1961. So John Coakley, who I introduced earlier, that young apprentice, by the time he had been working under George Gibson at MGM at all those years, he was ready. He was ready to branch out on his own. And so he went over to work at 20th Century Fox. And with him, he brought some of his team from MGM. He brought Gordon Butcher, and there he is next over in the white shirt, that's John Coakley. And on the far right over here is Art Ryder. He came over with him to 20th Century Fox. Yes?
Is that George Diestel in the black shirt?
That is George Diestel. Nice. That's George Diestel. And so he was working over at 20th Century Fox. Things were going great. His very first film was Snows of Kilimanjaro. This expansive backing, beautiful work. And he worked on Cleopatra. And when he went on vacation with his wife in Italy during Cleopatra, and when he came back, the studio had shuttered the scenic art department. He had no job. After the financial ramifications of what happened with that film, the scenic studio was shuttered. He was out of work for some time, picking up jobs here and there, and then decided to go into business on his own with his son, John Gary Coakley. And that's when J.C. Backings was born. And their first project was The Sound of Music. And most impressively, John Coakley negotiated the ability to work right back in the 20th Century Fox Scenic Studio. He rented their frames, stayed where he was, brought his own company there. And his next project was Mary Poppins, after which Disney stayed with him. And so here's an example of, this is his crew, and this is his son, young Gary Coakley, over on the far left. And now Gary Coakley's daughter, Lynn Coakley, she's the president of J.C. Backings. And she continues. All right, so here we have, this is back at MGM, in the MGM Scenic Studio. So J.C. Backings worked out of the 20th Century Fox space for some time, and then they ended up moving into the MGM space. So here we have an example of, here's Ben Rosella, who became the next perspective master working for J.C. Backings, brought in to work on Hello, Dolly, for that large film. So here we have Ben Rosella, Fred Took, Harry Tepker in 1970s, under the lead at the MGM Scenic Studios of Harry Tepker on the far right. And hand-painted scenery and backdrop. This knowledge passed from one artist to the next. All right, here we go. Now we have Harry Tepker here, again, working in that Scenic Studio at MGM. So here we are back. So J.C. Backings is one of the oldest and most established scenic backing companies in Hollywood. In 1972, they leased the MGM Scenic Paint building and purchased the studio's complete inventory of MGM-era backings. Appreciating the value and potential of these creative assets, J.C. provided a safe home for them during what was to become a protracted period of downsizing by many of the major studios of their physical assets. For as Tom Walsh, the father of this backdrop recovery project, put it, was an unregulated divestment of the soul of their historic film legacies for pennies on the dollar. In 1989, John Gary Coakley acquired the entire collection of 20th Century Fox backings to also add to their inventory. And here we have another example, Art Ryder continuing his work with J.C. Backings. This is at 20th Century Fox. And they were some of the finest painters, continued from the Golden Age. to work with them. All right. And here we have Harry Tepker, again, who is another MGM scenic artist, along with Clark Provins, working away. And this is what I really enjoy about these images, to be able to show you details of these paintings, is to see how open the brushwork is, what kinds of marks they're making. And my distinct interest in this entire project is to bring this kind of knowledge of painting to my studios and to the next generation so it's not lost. I'm considering myself more than anything in this whole project as a conduit to the next generation. And here we have Jim Dobson working away, doing these spectacular moves with a Dutch brush. This is really incredible mark making. All right, so here we are, J.C. Backings. This is them. This is that company in full swing in the 1970s, possibly even painting a backdrop for Star Trek. Who knows what they're resizing at this moment. Up front, we have Joe Francis. Next in, Chris Coakley. I don't know who the last one is. Bridget might know who that man. Right, who is that? But J.C. Backings was considered among the best in the industry, upholding the MGM system of training scenic artists. Painters served as apprentices for 5 to 6 years before taking any projects on solo, same as MGM. In addition to painting the new backings for motion pictures, a major portion of the young painters' training and experience was in the restoration of the collection of backdrops they held. So here's an example of a painting done by Duncan Spencer, years later being restored, well, and goofed around in front of, by scenic artist Chris Coakley. And there's young Chris Coakley working away. So restoration and education. This project very much, the recovery project, is very much about the idea of learning from ghosts. So J.C. Backings rented a paint frame at the Fox studio, and they used it to repair and restore their damaged rental drops. The backing was put up, and it was touched up and put back on the rack, so every time it went out, it was in good shape. Artist Michael Dennering, primarily who was working at MGM, spent several months over there, off and on. He said there were thousands of backings that went back to King Kong. To work on them, you had to understand what was originally done. You had to tie it in so it wouldn't make it look like it was tied in. It had to be fixed without showing. You had to deconstruct the process. Having that opportunity to see each backing really taught me more than anything you could possibly imagine. Each person that did them, they put their personal flair on them. Restoring these drops for a year or so gave me a good step up in terms of his training. It really gave him an advantage, and it was an opportunity that didn't come often. So here's an example of the J.C. Backings crew that were continuously painting backdrops for films, in addition to restoring these collections of backings that you're seeing here. All right. So for the next 45 remarkable and productive years, J.C. Backings successfully continued to paint, restore, and preserve backings for the film industry. Making and renting painted backings is and will always remain an important and central part of who they are. But as the entertainment industry evolves, so must its vendors and service providers. After much deliberation, J.C. Backings resolved in the spring of 2017 to relocate its studio operations to a new facility off the lot that would allow for it to expand its digital backing technologies while providing it with centralized storage space for its ever-growing inventory. During J.C.'s planning and relocation of the 2,000 painted backings that they held, they identified 207 canvases. Some historic, but for the most part, too fragile and specific in their genre and subject matter to remain active within their core catalog. This posed a critical question and a challenge of how to migrate and preserve these veterans from Hollywood's historic past. In 2012, the Art Directors Guild's archive began the comprehensive effort to preserve the legacy of Hollywood's motion picture scenic artists. This commitment to preservation has resulted in the possession of the world's most comprehensive archive on Hollywood scenic art and painting, and the creation of the Hollywood Backdrop Book. So here's an example of what the storage space under the MGM original scenic studio looked like. The imminent departure of J.C. Backings from its historic MGM-era scenic studio building presented an urgent and brief window to further capture this vanishing history. In collaboration with the Art Directors Guild's archives, JC Backings, and Sony Production Services, they developed a strategy to recover these potentially lost backings. And here, of course, is the MGM Scenic Paint Building, including L.B. Mayer's one-man elevator. And the paint floor is at a 50-foot level. And one of the very first pieces painted in this amazing space was The Wizard of Oz in 1938. When I think about this building, there's something really extraordinary to me and special at the thought of young John Coakley coming in when he was 16 years old. And it was a space built to keep painters safe and to work efficiently. So they could stand on this deck 50 feet up above ground level and push a button to raise these huge Titanic frames up and down. And it would be a space that would hold him safe and keep him safe and enable generations of artists to paint there. All right, so the Backdrop Recovery Project began with the endorsement of the Art Directors Guild Scenic, Title, and Graphics Arts Council. The ADG board approved a proposal to create the Backdrop Recovery Project. The project's mission and goal was to preserve the 207 exemplary historic backings for the purpose of their identification and eventual donation to museums, motion picture archives, and academic institutions for exhibition, educational uses, and scholarly endeavors. So here we are. This is the Sony studio stages in a way to recover these nearly lost paintings. The endeavor was made possible by hiring Art Directors Guild's members to assist the sorting and photographing and transporting and archiving of these backdrops. For the purpose of verifying Backdrop's origination, we were aided by the paint department's original collection of black and white 8x10 backing stills, as well as the Motion Picture Academy's Herrick Library, who provided us with that list of production show titles and numbers. These numbers were cross-referenced with each backing's existing paint department number, thereby allowing us to determine with almost full certainty each backing's original show title, the age, and the name of the art directors or production designers associated with the backing's origins. Though most of the largest backings were folded, the majority of the 207 canvases were attached to wooden battens, varying in size from 4 feet to 40 feet in length. During our recovery phase, all of these backings were transferred to Sony Studio Stage 23, where they were individually hung on a 60-foot-long truss held by 3 chain motors to facilitate a quick raising and lowering of each backing. Sony's grip and electric department provided all of the rigging, as well as the 12 Kinflow Image 80 light units for capturing the high-resolution digital photographs. While some backings have significant film titles, like the Parisian Café backing, representing the backlight cafe used in An American in Paris, 1953, many others were more obscure. But the one thing shared by all of these backings is that they're exemplary in their design, rendering, lighting, and color schemes. Most importantly, the majority of these backings were created during a time that we now all appreciate as the high Renaissance period of Hollywood scenic painting. So included in this inventory was a complete replica of the Sistine Chapel, along with, from 1968's The Shoes of a Fisherman, along with a 50-foot wide Last Judgment. It's incredible. And so this was all of the entire project was shot by photographer Melinda Sue Gordon. And importantly, each backing was shot both in full scale and in detail to chronicle the hand of the artist and preserve the process by which these monumental illusions were created. Metadata was collected about each backing's condition, dimensions, genre, origins, paint medium, surface, and show titles. So here's an example of that original black and white book from MGM. This is what they had used to inventory their backdrops. And here's our shot. But extraordinary detail here. And I am delighted beyond belief to be using these backdrops as teaching tools starting in the fall at the University of Texas at Austin. And these backdrops will also go to other academic institutions. I believe Cobalt Studios is receiving some to teach painting from as well. Some more details. This one was from National Velvet, 1944, and it's really exciting to be able to attribute this painting specifically to George Gibson. It's not very often in scenic art to be able to say this one scenic artist created this backing, because it's such a communal type of work. But this one I can attribute to George Gibson. Here we have Marie Antoinette, 1938, standing in front of one of the tapestries. And each time a discovery was made when these backdrops were unfurled, because we didn't know what was in the pile. This was the most exciting part of this odyssey, is we didn't know, and some of the backdrops had not been opened by J.C. Backings in their time, because they had acquired so many. And some of them they weren't sure about, but they were ready to have move on. So it was delightful to find backdrops that would coincide with my existing research from the project. So also from Kismet, this extraordinary, huge panoramic backdrop. It's so beautiful. This is from the Student Prince. And here's a shot of the backdrop. Also an exciting discovery was something from Forbidden Planet. That. Yes. Yes. And during the research for the book, I had come across this color sketch. So each painting that was done at MGM, and since then, through J.C. Backing's process, they do small color sketches and color studies to make sure the color is looking exactly right before they move on to the large-scale piece. And I was so excited to see this kind of saturation and to see then in life what became of that study and how to move forward. I'd only had the stills from the film otherwise. And here we have the backings in the film. This was 1956, and the color would have been set by Art Ryder and Wayne Hill. And here we have Silk Stockings, 1957, and I attribute all the drawing again to Ben Carre. I know. You could cry. I could cry. Here's another detail. And here's again this beautiful image, also from Silk Stockings. Another surprise find, the clock. All right. The project's mission and goal for the Art Directors Guild Backdrop Recovery Project, of course, was to preserve this as much as possible and to move these backdrops into major museums. So I'm excited to say the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences will also have examples of these backdrops. I believe the Gene Autry Museum and the Museum of the Moving Image in New York. And this is from The Prodigal, 1955. So there was the original photograph from the MGM inventory. And here's a detail of this painting. It's Technicolor at its finest, 1955. And here's a set still, or a production still. Here's another detail from The Prodigal of another backing. Young Bess, 1953. Young Bess. There she is. And here's a detail shot. How many painters do I have in here? Any other scenic artists? Yes, and painters? Yeah. Woo! And here again is looking back at that scenic studio. And I was delighted to find this backdrop closest to us. When it popped up and was unfurled, I'm just like, I know that painting. I'd been staring at that for 5 years before getting to that painting. It's from The Great Sinner, 1949. Oh, and Charlie is out here somewhere. He was asking about this backdrop from Little Women in 1949, where the set, there's the house is built physically here, and then a huge wraparound backdrop. So this specific backdrop was not in this collection, but this was from Little Women, and this will be going to the Academy, or has gone. And just extraordinary details. And then there's the summer scene. And this is from 2 Weeks in Another Town. And the really exciting part of this project as well is, as I said, as a painting teacher, to be able to show technically exactly how to do something. And so we were able to get behind the backdrops too, because all of these backdrops were painted so they could light up from behind. They're called translucencies. So from behind, look like that. So when you had time of day changes, you'd be able to have the windows light up, and sometimes they would punch little holes in these street lights and might back it with silk and then change the light behind it and flicker it around. If you've seen Die Hard, that whole convincing scene when he's hanging out of the building, there were tracking lights punched into those backdrops, and yeah, so there's constant trickery happening. And so here we have Lady in the Law, or Law and the Lady, 1951, and these chandeliers light up. They're stunning. And there's a detail. More details from The Law and the Lady. I think it's a really exquisite use of color, working from these cool to warm temperatures across that colonnade. North by Northwest, there were these, the United Nations building. And they were not able to shoot in the United Nations building during this film because the State Department was not excited about a murder happening in their building. So they sent somebody in. One of the art director's team went in with a camera, like in a bucket, and photographed the interior of the space. So this right here is the backdrop. Oh, I have, look. Hope gave this to me. The backdrop is just here. And the rest of this is a matte painting. It's tied in. And here's the backdrop. Wow. Yeah. And here's the other half. We also had a backing from The Sea of Grass, 1947. And one of my favorite images from the book was this, from The Outrage in 1963. And then we found this huge backdrop as part of this collection. So you could see it from the back again. So it was designed to have those clouds look like they're filled with water when lit from behind, so you could shift the time of day. Here, this is from The Honeymoon Machine, 1961. And again, it's an example of a translucent or a transparent. I've heard Hollywood folks call it a transparent painting. But once again, you have that painting that's backed out and opaqued out on the back except for the lights and the shadows. And this beautiful one from MGM's Billy Rose's Jumbo, 1962. And it's great interior. And so we made sure to have this clip of her up on the horse riding in front of this backdrop in that early film I shared. The Hangover, 1950. Two Loves. And some of these marks were made by pipe cleaners, like grouping, clustering pipe cleaners to create that grassy marks. Also, like 200 ways to use a lamb's wool roller to make these fluffy marks in here, but those would have been done, grasses done with pipe cleaners. More detail work. This piece is from Marlowe, 1969, this interior balcony of the Bradbury Building. And I posted this up on to a Scenic artist's page on, I think it was Facebook. And one of the Scenic artists asked, like, did Jesus paint that? They're so amazing. And this, I could not believe when this happened. We found something from Singing in the Rain. And I almost cried. We found it's a fiddle backdrop in this collection. And there it is. So unique among the many treasures now preserved was the Fit as a Fiddle vaudeville drop from Singing in the Rain, 1951, the United Nations lobby backing from North by Northwest, and the many Italian frescoes, of course, from the Shoes of the Fishermen. And this, it's from the last record, it was from Reunion in France, 1942. But you could see it's the same set. Right? The most important part of this project was, for me, of course, letting the world see these incredible backdrops. So it's not just my privilege as someone who was lucky enough to get to research this history and interview the last best scenic artists alive in Hollywood's history. But it was a chance to learn from ghosts. And now I'm hoping to help give generations of scenic artists and artists in the future to learn from these ghosts. And so this beautiful quote came up from author Austin Kleon, and he said, seeing yourself as part of the creative lineage will help you feel less alone as you start making your own stuff. I hang pictures of my favorite artists in my studio. They're like my friendly ghosts. I can almost feel them pushing me forward as I'm hunched over my desk. The great things about dead or remote masters is they can't refuse you as an apprentice. You could learn whatever you want from them. They've left you their lesson plans in their work. So here's the art director's archive staff. In their catalog of 207 backdrops, they're endeavoring to secure the best possible homes for all of these unique and historic artifacts. And they're currently, as I said, heading to museums and academic institutions nationwide. And now that we have a working digital database for all of these backings, further information regarding the names of the scenic artists responsible for creating these works, as well as additional film titles, will continue to be uploaded into that archive. But I would love to share. So here are some of the future homes: the Museum of the Moving Image, of course, the New Academy Museum. And here is Mark's film. I felt like he captured the spirit of the day so amazingly. So let's see Mark's film. And welcome to the end of an era.